So I just watched the season 1 finale for The Rings of Power, and oh boy, I have a lot to talk about. Now that the entire first season is out, it's time to get down to brass tacks. Was this show good, or was this show bad? A simple question with a pretty complicated answer. Obviously, this video will contain spoilers. I'm gonna start off with the bad stuff first before I get to the good stuff, so we end on, the happy ending. Because I did have problems with the show, and believe me, I have a whole list. I have it on my notes. The first of which being the timeline for the show is very, very compressed. It just feels weird watching everything because everything seems to be going at Mach speed. Because we see Elendil and Isildur in the show, and they really should not be in the show yet. But even with the compressed timeline making everything seem like it's going at Mach speed, I feel like the pacing for the show was actually really, really slow. Everything was moving at a snail's pace, and it wasn't until the last 3 episodes that things started to get more interesting, and that's when things started to speed up. So I feel like they could have paced it a little bit better. One of the main problems that I had with this show is that I felt that the writing and the dialogue for the show was kind of poor. It felt like I was watching fan fiction rather than an actual show at some points. And with that poor writing, I really didn't feel that much of a connection with any of the characters. And I have a theory for that I'll get to later. I didn't feel connected to Galadriel because I know she's going to survive. I know the Harfoots are going to survive because, well, we have the hobbits, and also I really didn't like the Harfoot story at all. I feel like we could have done entirely without the Harfoots because I really didn't feel invested in that story, more so than any of the other stories. Which brings me to the reason why I think I wasn't connected with these characters. The show started off the bat with 4 different point of views and 4 different plot points, and we really didn't have a lot of time to get connected with the characters. When you look at other stuff like Star Wars or even Game of Thrones, which is medieval fantasy, usually you see all the characters starting off in one place, like Winterfell in the pilot, or in the beginning of the books. Here we're introduced to all of the characters before they go off on their merry way, and then we get to see them build and develop throughout the series. In the Rings of Power, everyone is already split up, and it isn't until the end that some of the characters are brought together. Also, Rings of Power also did something that I absolutely despise, something that kind of made me die a little bit inside. And it's the scene when Galadriel is in the library at Numenor, when she's trying to get information on that weird eye symbol. And then she has that realization, oh, how could I have been so blind? And she turns the symbol sideways, and it's a map apparently. See, that curve is the mountains and that line is the other mountain? I couldn't believe that they did that. It felt like they watched The Rise of Skywalker and said, hey, remember when they did that thing with the knife and the Death Star? We're gonna do that again, but dumber. I really didn't like that they did that. Also, the dam. I liked what they did with the Southlands and that erupting volcano, but did they really need that magical sword to open up the dam? I get it's a key to make it open up, but couldn't they just have destroyed the dam? Because Adar had quite a lot of orcs at his service, and they did dig miles of canals to get the water to the mountain, which is a lot of hard work. So you think they couldn't have, I don't know, use that work to break down the dam? I don't remember them mentioning it to be a magical dam. Magical sword, oh for sure, that is one magical sword, but a magical dam? I don't know. I'll admit that's pretty nitpicky, but I feel like that's a major plot hole. Also, at the very end of the show, they made the 3 rings. Where are the other 16? If I recall correctly, they make the 16 lesser rings first, and then they make the 13 grander rings. You know, the ones that actually have names and gems and all that stuff. So where are the other 16? Are they gonna do that in season 2? Where did they go? What happened to them? And this is my last point, I promise. The last thing that I didn't like was the face zooms. I don't know why they did this, but the director made a very strange choice where there were some scenes where the camera's just looking at the face of the character and the character is looking right at the camera, either looking into the blank voidness or talking to another character. Like the hallucination with Galadriel and Halbrand. That was a really weird scene. I feel like they could have shot that better. It kind of just looked goofy, and all those scenes with the face zoom-ins just felt really goofy. After 5 episodes of The Rings of Power, I felt like the show was on a downward spiral. I felt like there wasn't a lot there for me to really get invested in, and I felt like the negatives outweighed the positives. But then, the last 3 episodes came and completely turned everything on its head. It wasn't until the last 3 episodes where things started to get really interesting. And now we're gonna get into the things that I liked about the show. The cinematography was amazing. It was beautifully shot, the sets, the landscape, but I expected that too because, they did put $200 million into the first season alone. So that didn't exactly surprise me. And there were some really cool action scenes scenes during the series and really epic scenes, but it wasn't until the last 3 episodes where I feel like the story kind of started to take form. It felt like there was nothing before the last 3 episodes. Starting with the eruption of the volcano and the creation of Mordor, I thought that was cool, and I thought that was a cool concept. Obviously, that was something that was definitely creative freedom, but I feel like that was something that was good creative freedom. I thought that was very smart, because we really don't know a lot about the creation of Mordor, or why Mount Doom erupted in the first place, so I thought that was really cool that they added that. But my favorite episode so far in the series was the last one, and that was when we found out that spoiler alert, when it was revealed that Halbrand is Sauron. Now, I took a day to kind of digest this because I didn't know how I felt about that, because in the books, it's an elf named Anatar who comes to help the elves create the Rings of Power. And again, he creates many more than just the 3. He helps with the creation of 16. So I really didn't know how I felt about them replacing Anatar with Halbrand. But now, after a day of letting it digest and simmer, I like it because I thought that Halbrand was a very interesting character. He was always very shady from the beginning, and we really didn't know a whole lot about him, but you could tell that he was really manipulative. And he had a charming personality about him that seemed to hide something darker. And, well, we were right. And I thought they did that character well, and I thought that the actor portrayed it very well. Because Halbrand is everything that Sauron in his hidden form is supposed to be. He's deceptively charming and seems to be your friend and a person that's there to give you gifts. But in reality, everything's working towards his own selfish intentions. And it's only after watching the last season that I see how calculated Sauron is in the show, convincing the Númenóreans to go into Middle-earth to fight in the Southlands, to defeat Adar, and at the same time creating Mordor. So he got 2 birds with 1 stone, defeating his enemies and creating the realm where he's going to rule. And also his injury, which I'm starting to think that he baked it because he recovered very, very quickly from that injury in order to get into the elf kingdom so that he can start with the forging of the rings and getting inside their heads. So I really, really liked what they did with Halbrand. And I really liked the final shot of him overlooking Mordor. And it did leave me wanting, which is the last thing that I really liked about the show. It did strangely leave me wanting more because they had a lot of unanswered questions. Where's Isildur? He's supposed to be dead, but we know he's not dead because he's in the Lord of the Rings, and he's the one that cuts the finger off of Sauron's hand. How's Sauron going to proceed? Because Adar is still in Mordor, so he has to kind of defeat him. Were the 16 Lesser Rings? What's going to happen to the Southland people? And questions like that just left me wanting more. Which brings me back to the question, was the show good or was it bad? My personal opinion is it wasn't as bad as everyone thought it was going to be, but it wasn't the miracle that Amazon needed. It was nowhere near the Peter Jackson trilogies, but it wasn't the train wreck that everybody thought it was going to be. The major fear that I had was I was afraid that Amazon was going to make the show political, but there was no politics at all. It didn't feel like there was any agenda. It felt like they were actually telling a Tolkien story to the best of their ability. So how would I rate this show? I think I would rate it a 6.5 out of 10. Because interestingly enough, I had a comparison because at the same time of The Rings of Power, The House of the Dragon was also airing. So I got to see 2 medieval fantasy shows at the same time and kind of weighed apples to apples. And while I love the Lord of the Rings universe more, House of the Dragon takes this without a doubt, without question. I was actually invested with the characters of the House of the Dragon. I felt that the plot was better there, and it gave me emotional reactions to some scenes, which is something that you want in a good TV show, and I didn't necessarily get that in The Rings of Power. So with The Rings of Power having a 6.5 out of 10, I feel like that's the right score to give it. I am looking forward to season 2 because I am wondering how it is going to progress. This series did beat my original prediction. It was a little bit over painfully average, which means congratulations, Amazon. You kind of proved me wrong. Though I will say this, I feel like Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War portrayed the Celebrimbor and Sauron in Disguise story better, so make of that what you will.